On February 11th, someone put money into the ransom wallet, not the kidnappers. The other side. Investigators, working with Nancy Guthrie's family, deposited a small amount of Bitcoin into the wallet that had been used to demand nearly $2 million for her safe return. And attached to that deposit was a message. According to sources familiar with the communication, the message was clear. "We are ready to talk. We want to resolve this. Tell us what you need." February 11th. Ready to talk. And then nothing. No response. No counter-demand. No new message. No proof of life. No movement in the wallet. Complete and total silence from the other side. Silence that has lasted, according to reporting, from that day forward. Investigators who have reviewed the timeline of this case believe that the sudden cessation of contact after February 11th is one of the most significant and disturbing data points in the entire investigation, because there are only a few explanations for why someone who sent a ransom demand and was actively communicating would go permanently silent the moment the other side indicated willingness to negotiate. And the most chilling interpretation, the one that sources close to the investigation have begun to acknowledge, carefully and reluctantly, is that by the time authorities responded with money and a message, something had already happened to Nancy Guthrie. The silence after February 11th may not be a negotiating tactic, it may be the answer. But to understand why that date matters, and why the investigation into Nancy's disappearance is becoming as much about institutional accountability as it is about finding her, we need to go back to the beginning. SFX, low ambient drone, slow fade. Nancy Guthrie was not an abstraction. She was a 61-year-old woman who lived in Tucson, Arizona, and who had, by every account, built a life full of people who loved her. She was the mother of Savannah Guthrie, one of the most recognized faces in American broadcast journalism, co-anchor of the Today Show on NBC. But that connection, while significant to this story in several ways, was not what defined Nancy to the people who actually knew her. What defined her was something quieter and more ordinary. She was present. She showed up. She was the mother-in-law who got dinner with the family, the grandmother who was part of the regular rhythm of people's lives. On the night of January 31st, 2026, she had dinner with family, was driven home by her son-in-law Tommaso Cioni, was confirmed safely inside her house at approximately 9:50 p.m., and was never seen again. Nancy Guthrie was not a high-profile crime victim in the sense that she had enemies or a complicated life. She was, by all available evidence, a woman whose only offense was being the mother of someone famous. And that, according to investigators, is likely why she was targeted in the first place. If you've been following the Nancy Guthrie investigation and you want every development the moment it breaks, including what the February 11th silence actually means for the investigation's direction, make sure you're subscribed to The Obscure Report. This case is in a critical phase right now, and you do not want to miss what's coming next. When Nancy was reported missing on February 1st, the Pima County Sheriff's Office opened a missing persons investigation. What happened in the days immediately following her disappearance has been, in retrospect, a study in how much can happen beneath the surface of an investigation that appears, publicly, to be moving slowly. The ransom demand arrived. Bitcoin, nearly $2 million. The FBI was brought in, as they are by protocol, in any case involving a kidnapping demand. And the combination of federal and local investigators began working the case in a direction that had not been publicly disclosed. The FBI's standard protocol in ransom situations is not to pay. We covered that in detail in a previous video. The 3 reasons the Bureau advises against ransom payment in kidnapping cases: the precedent problem, the no guarantee problem, and the operational intelligence problem. But protocol is not the same as inaction. The FBI in ransom cases communicates. They stall, they probe, They send signals to the other side designed to keep the line open while investigators work the forensic trail. And on February 11th, according to sources, the decision was made to do exactly that, to deposit a small test amount of Bitcoin into the wallet and attach a message signaling willingness to engage. This is standard technique. You're not paying the ransom. You're keeping the door open. You're demonstrating good faith to whoever is on the other side in order to prevent them from doing something irreversible. You're buying time. And you're watching what happens to the wallet. Because how a ransom wallet responds to an incoming signal tells investigators an enormous amount about who is running it, how sophisticated they are, and what their actual intentions are. What the wallet told investigators on February 11th, by doing absolutely nothing, may be the most important forensic signal in this entire case. I want you to hold on to a specific phrase that one source used when describing the post-February 11th silence. They said, by the time they responded, something tragic might have already happened. I want you to think about that sentence carefully, because it doesn't say the response caused the silence. It says the response revealed it. The silence was already there. The February 11th deposit didn't cause whoever was on the other side to go quiet. It exposed the fact that there was nobody left on the other side to respond. That is what investigators believe they may be looking at. SFX, low drone hold, slight swell. Now here's where this case takes a turn that has nothing to do with Bitcoin and everything to do with the institution that is supposed to be leading the ground investigation. Because while all of this was unfolding, the ransom demand, the Bitcoin forensics, the FBI's careful signaling strategy, the man running the Pima County Sheriff's Office, Sheriff Chris Nanos, was being summoned to answer for something that had nothing to do with Nancy Guthrie, and everything to do with whether he is capable of running an investigation of this magnitude at all. The Pima County Board of Supervisors called Sheriff Nanos to appear before them. What they wanted to talk about was not Nancy Guthrie. What they wanted to talk about was a pattern of conduct allegations that, according to reporting, spans years. Allegations that paint a picture of a person who has, repeatedly and in documented fashion, lied to the institutions he serves, lied under oath, and used physical force against individuals in his custody. Let me be specific about what has been reported, because specificity matters here. Allegation 1. Sheriff Nanos allegedly lied on his job application. Not a minor omission, not a clerical error, a deliberate misrepresentation in the documentation he submitted when applying for his position. The nature of the specific misrepresentation has been reported in local Tucson media and has been reviewed by the Board of Supervisors. Allegation 2. Perjury under oath. According to reporting, Nanos allegedly made false statements while under oath, meaning in a formal legal context where he had sworn to tell the truth. The specific circumstances of this allegation have been part of the board's inquiry. Allegation 3. Nanos allegedly assaulted an individual who was already in handcuffs. That person was hospitalized. Nanos received a 15-day suspension. To be clear about what that means in context, a law enforcement officer allegedly struck a restrained, handcuffed individual with sufficient force to send that person to a hospital, and the disciplinary consequence was 15 days of suspension. He kept his job, he continued his career, and he eventually became the sheriff of Pima County. Allegation 4. Nanos allegedly lied about conducting a traffic stop. Specifically, according to reporting, he claimed he had not stopped someone, and that denial was contradicted by footage that captured the stop on camera. He said one thing, the camera showed another. Allegation 5. Nanos allegedly used language described as vile toward a woman during work hours. The nature of that language has been reported, but I'm not going to repeat it here. What matters is that it was sufficiently serious to be included in a formal inquiry by the county's governing body. And if you want to follow the accountability thread in this investigation, the forensic picture, the institutional questions, the Nanos inquiry. Subscribe to The Obscure Report. I am watching this closely, and I will post every development as it happens. Here is why the Nanos allegations matter to the Nancy Guthrie investigation in a way that goes beyond general character concerns. The Pima County Sheriff's Office is the primary local law enforcement agency on this case. The FBI is involved, and the FBI's institutional capacity in kidnapping and ransom investigations is substantial. But the local investigation, the ground-level search, the community canvassing, the coordination with Tucson area agencies runs through Nanos's office. When a sheriff is simultaneously under investigation by his own governing board for a documented pattern of dishonesty and misconduct, the question of whether that investigation is being run with full institutional integrity becomes not a hypothetical, but an active concern. There is also a specific echo here that is hard to ignore. One of the allegations against Nanos is that he denied conducting a traffic stop, and then was shown on camera doing exactly that. In other words, he looked at a documented record of something that happened and told investigators it didn't happen. That is not a personality quirk. That is a documented pattern of behavior in which physical reality and Nanos's account of it diverge. For a sheriff managing an investigation in which the integrity of the evidentiary record is everything, that pattern is not incidental. It is directly relevant. And I want to add one more layer to the accountability question that I think deserves serious attention. The community of Tucson, the residents of Pima County who are living with this case, who watched it unfold in their city, who drove past the candlelight vigils and saw the missing person flyers and followed every development on local news. Those people deserve to know whether the sheriff's office overseeing this investigation is operating with full institutional integrity. The misconduct allegations against Nanos are not rumor, they are documented. They have been reviewed by the county's governing board. Suspensions were served. Records exist. The question of whether those records are compatible with the kind of leadership that a case of this magnitude requires is not a political question. It is a factual one, and it is one that the Board of Supervisors, to their credit, appears to be asking out loud. The defense of Nanos that has circulated in some quarters is that whatever happened in his past, the Nancy Guthrie investigation is being managed primarily by the FBI, and federal resources and oversight are what matters most in a case of this scale. That is a fair point, and I want to acknowledge it directly. The FBI's involvement is significant, and its institutional capacity in kidnapping cases is substantial. But federal involvement does not eliminate local accountability. The sheriff's office is still the primary local agency. Deputies from that office are still doing ground-level work. The sheriff's public statements are still shaping public understanding of the investigation's progress. And if those statements are issued by a person with a documented pattern of saying things that are contradicted by physical evidence, that matters. Not as an accusation, but as a legitimate institutional concern that the people of Pima County have a right to take seriously. And there is one more dimension here that I don't think most coverage has fully accounted for. Nanos was the one who, on February 16th, issued the public statement formally clearing Tommaso Cioni and the entire Guthrie family as suspects. That clearance was correct. Every available piece of evidence supports it, and a retired FBI special agent confirmed it publicly. But consider the institutional dynamic. The person issuing that clearance is the same person who allegedly, in his own professional history, lied about what he did and didn't do, made false statements under oath, and used force on a restrained individual. The clearance may be accurate, but the source of the clearance is now under formal inquiry. That complexity is real, and it deserves to be named. SFX, tone shift, subtle, slight decrease in ambient. Now I want to work through the three interpretive frameworks that investigators and analysts have applied to the February 11th silence. because this is where the case gets genuinely complicated, and where reasonable people who have looked at the same evidence have landed in very different places. The first framework is what I would call the completion theory. Under this interpretation, whoever took Nancy Guthrie was never seriously planning to return her. The ransom demand was a means of extracting money from a wealthy and prominent family under the cover of a transaction that appeared reversible. The communication that preceded February 11th was theater, maintaining the appearance of negotiation to keep law enforcement from shifting resources to a recovery operation rather than a rescue operation. Under this framework, the silence after February 11th is not a response to the FBI's deposit. It's a pre-planned exit from a transaction that was always going to end one way. The demand, the back and forth, the eventual silence, all of it was scripted in advance. The February 11th signal from investigators didn't change anything because whoever was on the other side had already moved on. The second framework is the operational disruption theory. This interpretation holds that the silence was not pre-planned but was triggered by something that made the people behind the demand believe the investigation was getting too close. Under this reading, the FBI's February 11th deposit, or something that happened in the days surrounding it, was interpreted by the perpetrators as a sign that law enforcement had made forensic progress on the Bitcoin wallet, the communications channel, or the identity of the individuals involved. The silence is a protective response. They went dark because they had to. Under this framework, Nancy's situation at the time of the silence is unknown. The silence reflects the perpetrator's decision to disengage from the transaction, not necessarily a change in Nancy's circumstances. The third framework is the one that sources close to the investigation have signaled most cautiously, and it is the one that haunts this case. The timeline theory. Under this reading, the silence after February 11th reflects not a decision made by perpetrators on February 11th or later, but a reality that already existed before February 11th. The people who made the ransom demand were communicating up to a point. Then they stopped. The FBI responded on February 11th, and nobody answered. Not because they decided not to answer, but because by that point, there was a reason they couldn't or wouldn't. This framework says, the silence is not a tactic. The silence is information, and what it may be telling investigators is that whatever happened to Nancy Guthrie happened before the people who were supposed to be negotiating for her life were ever given a genuine opportunity to do so. What makes the timeline theory particularly difficult to dismiss is the specificity of the silence. In ransom cases, silence typically comes in patterns. There's the strategic pause, a delay of hours or a couple of days designed to maintain psychological leverage. There's the disrupted communication, a sudden gap caused by a phone change, a location change, operational logistics, and then there's the permanent absence, which is structurally different from both. Investigators who work these cases can usually distinguish between a negotiator going quiet for leverage and a communication channel that has simply ceased to exist. The silence in the Nancy Guthrie case, running from February 11th forward with no resumption, no new demand, no acknowledgement of the deposit, no proof of life, is being described by people familiar with the situation in language that sounds less like the first category and more like the third. There is also the question of what a sophisticated ransom operation does when the other side signals willingness to negotiate. In a professional extortion scenario, organized, planned, executed with the intent of actually receiving payment, a deposit to the wallet paired with a conciliatory message is exactly what the perpetrators are waiting for. It's the moment of leverage, the moment you've been building toward, and the rational response to that moment is not silence. It's a counter message, a new demand, a proof of life to demonstrate you still have something the other side values. The fact that none of that came, that the FBI's olive branch landed in a wallet and received no response at all, is what sources describe as deeply inconsistent with a functioning ransom operation. You don't ignore the moment you've been engineering, unless there's nothing left to engineer. If that third framework is correct, and I want to be clear, at the time of this recording, it is one theory among several and has not been confirmed, then February 11th is not just a date. It is a threshold, a point at which an investigation that had been conducted on the assumption that there was still time became an investigation of a different kind entirely. And that realization, if it came on February 11th or in the days that followed, would explain something about the subsequent shift in the official public posture of this investigation. Because the Pima County Sheriff's Office has, since mid-February, changed the language it uses when discussing Nancy's case. The early emphasis was on active recovery, on the search for Nancy, on the assumption that she was alive and that finding her was the goal. The more recent emphasis, careful, measured, deliberately not declarative, has begun to include language about finding answers for the family. That is a phrase that law enforcement uses in a specific context, and the people who cover these cases professionally have noticed it. There's something I planted earlier in this video that I want to come back to now, because I think it reframes what I've been telling you. I mentioned that the FBI's February 11th deposit was designed to keep the line open, to prevent whoever was on the other side from doing something irreversible. Investigators use that framing in cases where they believe the victim is still in a situation that can be changed. The choice of that particular goal, preventing something irreversible, implies that they believed, as of February 11th, that there was still something left to prevent. The silence that followed may have told them, in the absence of any words at all, that they were wrong. SFX, silence beat. Brief, deliberate. Where does the Nancy Guthrie investigation stand today? The DNA analysis of biological material recovered from the scene is ongoing. The sheriff told a local neighborhood watch group it could take up to 6 more months. The FBI continues to work the identification of the individual known as the porch guy, the masked and armed person who appeared on Nancy's doorbell camera the morning of her disappearance. That identification remains the central forensic priority. Genetic genealogy work is underway. The Pima County Board of Supervisors has formally convened to address the misconduct allegations against Sheriff Nanos. How that inquiry concludes and what consequences, if any, follow will be significant for the institutional credibility of the local investigation going forward. No arrest has been made. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. And the ransom wallet, as of the time of this recording, has shown no movement since the FBI's February 11th deposit went unanswered. I need to say something directly before I ask you my question. Two things can be true at the same time in this case, and I think the public conversation around it has not always held both of them. It can be true that investigators, federal and local, have worked this case with real professionalism and genuine urgency. And it can also be true that the institution nominally running the local response to this case is, at this exact moment, under formal scrutiny for a pattern of behavior that includes documented dishonesty and documented use of force on a restrained person. Both of those things are true, and the family of Nancy Guthrie, which includes Savannah Guthrie, who has watched this investigation from the most painful possible vantage point, deserves an honest accounting of both, not one. Both. The February 11th deposit happened. The silence that followed it happened. Whatever that silence means, and I am not going to pretend to know with certainty what it means, it is now one of the most significant unanswered questions in this entire investigation. Someone was willing to put money into that wallet and say, "We're ready," and whatever was waiting on the other side said nothing back. Here's what I want to ask you directly, and I want your honest answer in the comments below. We've covered the February 11th Bitcoin signal, the complete silence that followed it, the three frameworks investigators are applying to what that silence means, and the Board of Supervisors' inquiry into the sheriff leading the ground response. My question is this: do you believe the silence after February 11th is an operational decision, that the perpetrators went dark deliberately because they sensed the investigation closing in? Or do you believe it reflects something that had already happened to Nancy before investigators ever got a chance to respond? Tell me what you think. I want to know. I read every comment. Subscribe to the Obscure Report. I post every development in this investigation as it happens. The DNA timeline, the porch guy identification, the Board of Supervisors' inquiry into nanos, and everything that comes next. There are things in this case that haven't been reported yet, and when they break, I'll be here. And the next case in the pipeline, I'll just say this: it involves a disappearance that looks like an accident, evidence that doesn't fit the accident theory, and a family that has been waiting 11 years for someone to finally look closely enough.